one of the things that helps make people open to change, is if they've been part of the process of developing that change and they have a community supporting them. So they don't feel like somehow they've just reversed themselves and now look at them, they're all out on their own walking off the edge of a cliff.
This episode of Voices from the Field is the second of a two-part series on a new project called the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance. NCAT's team on the project, Climate Smart Agriculture Coordinator Elise Haschke, and Sustainable Agriculture Specialists Robert Maggiani and Darron Gaus, join with other organizations and producers involved in the project to spread the word. They talk about the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance's starting goals, the problems they're trying to address, and how the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance works jointly with other organizations and producers to resolve the major issues that agriculture and climate change have brought forward. Let's listen.
All right, so we all talked last time about the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance and what the goals are for this endeavor. We also talked to other Alliance members about some of the challenges that Texas Soil Wealth Alliance looks to solve. I encourage folks to go back and have a listen if they haven't heard part one already. We'll hear more from these members as we look towards solutions. Let's dive back into the conversation with Christine Martin. So Christine, you mentioned the word on everybody or every Texan's lip right now is drought. The majority of Texas is in yet another drought. So what philosophies and practices do you use to manage water on your operation? I know you mentioned the berms and swales. What else do you do?
So all I do, which has been my saving grace, is I plan for the recovery of the grasses. So that's when I talk about planned rotational grazing, that's what I'm referring to. I have gone out and I've made sure that after I graze a paddock, I'm allowing for enough recovery time so that when I come back to it, it has grown. And so I'm not eating old forage, I'm eating new growth. And as a consequence, I don't know what's happening underground because I can't do a cross section, but given the response during this drought that I'm still green and I'm still getting growth after I graze, I'm strongly, how do I say this? I do believe that I've got a root system and I've got enough aeration in the soil that has absorbed the water, that the grasses are able to take in that water that's in the soil. The root structure is deep enough that it's getting that water source and allowing for it to regrow after I graze it. It doesn't grow much, but it does grow. And so that's been my saving grace this drought. I also, when we plan our grazing, I also make sure I have a drought plan. So I monitor the rainfall and compare it to average. And if I see that I'm not getting that rainfall, then I start measuring how much forage I have available ahead of me and determine how many animals I can support. And if I don't have enough forage, then I reduce my herd or flock accordingly so that I can do it. The trick to drought management is to understand how much forage you had ahead of you and then adjust your herd, your flock, so that you can feed them. And the sooner you downsize your herd or your flock, the longer you can feed these animals.
Well, that's very interesting, and it kind of ties back to what what brought you to this place was your health and the health of the population and the health of the globe, and now the way that you're planning ahead and using your grazing management style to think of the health of the animals, the plants, and the soil. It's a really good tie back to how you started. And when we think about all these problems, there's so many problems out there. We're looking at producers like you to work with the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance and get your word to more producers so that you become a mentor to them and hopefully teach them how to manage their land like this as well.
That's another big sigh one, because it's like, oh my, that's a lot. Which ones do I pick?
That's Judith McGeary again, Executive Director of Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. When asked what pieces need to come together to form a collective solution that can undergird a long-term resolution to a climate-engaged regenerative food system.
So I think just trying to pick some pieces, some of the major pieces of it. One is building the knowledge base and access. So supporting independent research, supporting publicly funded research, supporting groups like, NCAT and FARFA and HMI and others in getting that information out to farmers and ranchers and other landowners. The information needs to be readily accessible. There is some new information that's needed. We've abandoned publicly funded research really for non-GMO varieties of plants that are well adapted on a regional basis. We need that back more than ever with the climate changes. So that's one big piece. Another big piece is fixing the markets so that the farmers who are raising high quality food have reasonable access to connect to the consumer base, which is out there. It's not that there's a lack of consumer interest. It's a lack of the processing and the distribution and the marketing opportunities in between the farmers and the consumers. And so that involves things like antitrust enforcement and getting serious about antitrust and monopolies and oligopolies. It includes addressing the regulatory barriers so that these regulations that were written by these huge companies in their own economic interests aren't used effectively. At this point, they're weaponized against small farmers and small scale food production and local food production. So we need to deal with that market side. And then we also need to address the question of the societal benefits and costs. So something people have talked about for quite some time is the, again, dominant conventional model imposes a great deal of costs on both their immediate neighbors, people who live next door to a lot of, to a CAFO or feedlot can tell you there's a lot of costs on the neighbors. And then there's the indirect costs and the way that we have farmed and its contribution to toxins in the air, toxins in the water, the greenhouse gas emissions. And all of that has basically allowed that food to be artificially cheap, and society pays the price for it. Well, the flip of that is when you farm like the one farmer we mentioned who made it through Hurricane Harvey and 50 inches of rain with no flooding, that's not just great for him. How much were his neighbors benefited? Because he didn't have water sluicing off his land onto theirs. What sort of benefits could a city like Houston see if the next hurricane that hit, there were farms like his all around Houston? How many millions of dollars could have been saved from the reduction of flooding? So, and there's all sorts of other ways. There's lots of these benefits that are provided to immediate neighbors and to the broader community by regenerative farming. And just as we should be requiring farmers to internalize the costs of what they do, if you are polluting your neighbors, that should be your cost to bear. We also should be looking at how do we benefit the farmers? How do we compensate them for the benefits that they provide to their neighbors in the community? And there's a lot of talk about carbon markets in this world. And I just want to briefly say, I'm not a fan of carbon markets for a couple of reasons. One is they're basically a pay to pollute system. The companies are like, oh yeah, here, I'll pay you a little bit of money and I get to continue what I'm doing, which doesn't really solve the problem. Two, the farmers, very rarely have I seen any real proposal that gives any significant real compensation to the farmers. It's tokens compared again to the economic benefit to the people that are buying these credits. And three, they ignore this whole wide range of benefits that farmers who are farming regeneratively provide. It's not, carbon sequestration is important, and it's wonderful, and it's vital, and it's just one of these things that farmers, when you farm regeneratively. So if we have a carbon market and you're simply paid by the ton of carbon that you sequester, and if somebody comes up with this cool gadget and it sequesters a ton of carbon and they get paid the same thing, well, guess what? That actually doesn't make sense from an economic societal benefit standpoint. The farmers are doing so much more than just sequestering carbon. And so we really need to look at simply supporting the farmers who are doing regenerative ag because of this incredibly wide range of good things that they're doing for our society, on top of raising healthy food and ensuring that, people are able to eat in the future, which is kind of vital.
The most vital, arguably.
Just a little bit of sarcasm.
I couldn't tell, Judith.
So we are, as an alliance, faced with some huge hurdles here. How will the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance address these difficult to solve problems, like greater adoption of climate-minded agricultural practices?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, Darren, is obviously engaging the producers as the audience that we want to address, and also having producers at different times and different venues be part of our team that is going to be doing the presentations and all the questions. We want to make sure that we use the producer mentor strategy of trying to relate to producers about how do these practices actually work, and also at some time, at some point in time, we're going to be hearing from producers who said we're going to get up in front of other producers and say, I tried practice A, cover cropping, and in this scenario it didn't work. And so, word to the wise, don't think that cover crops are going to work in every scenario under every type of weather pattern. And so it's going to be of interest to see how we encourage producers and recruit producers to be part of our team to get the word out. So that's one way that I know we're going to do it, is involve producers to help us get the word out.
Yes, absolutely, Robert. I completely agree with you on that. And the Soil Wealth Alliance has come up with this mission to ultimately accelerate the adoption of soil health practices on Texas agricultural lands, to enhance farmer and rancher prosperity, to mobilize land-based climate solutions, to protect Texas's natural resources and wildlife habitat, biodiversity, as well as advance health and wealth for all Texans. And so, it's so important that anything that we design be centered in the producer experience and the producer voice, and really honestly, the idea of elevating producers' voices through stories and storytelling is critical to any outcomes that are presented. But we have been looking towards, we have been looking towards a report that came out of Nebraska called Soil Health for Nebraska Wealth. And, it's our naming is somewhat similar to that, but it's a really great report that basically outlines it includes research, and it has recommendations for how the entire state can really wrap their arms around and provide support to producers who are looking to implement soil health practices in a way that makes sense for the producers. And so what we're proposing to do here is a similar report. It would be, we're anticipating maybe envisioning a 2-year planning process that would bring a statewide group of stakeholders to the table, and experts in climate, biodiversity and wildlife habitat, farm economics, soil science, and really start digging into what are some of those targets that we want to reach for Texas to ensure that Texas can continue to produce food and rebound from extreme weather events, and also ensure producer prosperity. And And we'll do that by engaging stakeholders, but also creating a learning community amongst the stakeholder membership, and communicate and outreach across the state, and hopefully come up with some enduring projects that we can jointly pursue together to scale our impact and really create a movement infrastructure for producers in Texas.
And I think creating those projects is one of the strong points of why NCAT and ATTRA, we're really going to be a major player on the Soil Wealth Alliance. That's what we do at NCAT and ATTRA. We go write proposals, and we get USDA funding, and we get private funding to address questions and research ideas that will come out of all of these, meetings that involve all the Soil Wealth Alliance members that we talked about earlier. We have the professors from the different universities. We have Willie Durham from NRCS. We have all of these people who are, have their day job, so to speak, doing similar things. And we're coming together and we're talking about ideas. And then we at NCAT and ATTRA, we go get the funding to execute those ideas. So it's a big part of what NCAT and ATTRA has done forever. And now we're, bringing this group together and say, let's be even a little bit more focused on the intersectionality of climate mitigation and good agriculture practice, soil health. How do those come together? How do we make that work for producers and other, players in the soil in the food system? We do have people on our Soil Wealth Alliance. I didn't mention that earlier, but we do have people from other parts of the soil, the chain, the food system. We have a representative from HEB. I'm sure all of the folks in Texas will recognize who HEB is. They realize they have a role to play as the producers start, producing all of these products, these food products, whether they're grains or vegetables or meat products or cheese or whatever. HEB is going to have a huge role to play in helping market all of those products, helping them become a business success. That's all part of the whole process of, farm to plate, is making it work. And so we have these people coming together on a regular basis, coming up with ideas, research projects, and then we at ATTRA and NCAT, we go get the funding to execute those projects. That's the way I see the wealth, the Soil Wealth Alliance really helping to try to solve those problems.
So Elise, you mentioned the name a while ago, and I just want to expound on that and what Judith said also about the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance's views on wealth in terms of soil. So why did y'all choose soil wealth in the name as a kind of play on of the term soil health?
That's a great question.
Yeah, we did it for a couple of reasons. I'll just give you my perspective real quick. Again, ATTRA and NCAT, we've been involved in soil health forever. From a almost strictly producer perspective, we wanted to make sure that people who are not producers and even producers understand that soil health can be translated into wealth, not only soil wealth, but the whole idea of wealth all across the food system. Depending on a person's role in the food system, he or she or that organization will have a different concept of what wealth means to them. And we're trying to use that phraseology, that name, to make sure that we're all thinking about how all the different pieces in the drama, so to speak, are all related to each other through the concept of wealth. That's what I see, how it really, we're trying to make this, stimulate conversation.
Exactly. That is a very good point, Robert. All of what you said, but the last part especially, it's a great opportunity to stimulate conversation and expand this just beyond the farm gate. So this was something that the Alliance, this is a name the Alliance came up with after we had been meeting for about 6 or 7 months. And we really wanted to be able to embrace the full effort of what we were doing. And the idea of soil wealth came up because that takes us beyond the idea of mere profit. Right. So it's the idea of building soil health to advance societal wealth. And of course, for producers, this looks like adopting soil health practices that will enrich that soil organic matter. The idea of making deposits in the soil bank, and then that pays the dividends over time of fertility, productivity, resilience to extreme weather conditions. But then wealth is really moving us beyond those economic benefits.
Mark your calendars for the 8th Annual Latino Farmer Conference on November 17th and 18th in Escondido, California. This annual Sustainable Agriculture Conference brings together Latino farmers, the agriculture industry, and advocates for sustainability. Join NCAT and NRCS for 2 days of workshops, local farm visits, networking, and learning, all in Spanish. Register today at latinofarmerconference.ncat.org.
And we can start talking about, well, what is wealthy soil? I like to think about it from that perspective. Let's animate soils. And so when we're thinking about wealthy soil, I think about the accumulation of all of those beneficial physical, biological, and chemical assets that soil can accrue through these health practices that ultimately improve water quality, that ultimately enhance biodiversity and create and restore wildlife habitat, that buffer against food production losses and potential supply chain disruptions from climate change. So I like thinking about it in those two ways, but then you can also take it beyond the property gate and say soil wealth is a state of collective abundance and prosperity that ultimately strengthens the local communities, rural communities, and nourishes healthy bodies, nourishes healthy Texan bodies in our framework, but across the whole nation.
So another recurring theme that I've heard today is kind of going statewide with it, whether that be getting the organizations and producers all across the different sectors of agriculture and across the different regions involved, and also the end result. When this alliance meets its goals, it's going to have an effect on the entire state. So why is it important to make this a statewide effort?
Well, I'll start off, and then Robert, I'd love to also have you contribute since you have such an extensive network here in Texas. But I will say that when we're talking about, again, all of the kind of fragmented experts and organizations that are working on a similar, adoption of practices that ultimately improve soil health, but for different motivating reasons, we see an opportunity as NCAT being the connector to connect these stakeholders across a sprawling movement in this very large state to identify shared goals and concerns and develop enduring trust and build that relationship infrastructure that could transcend an alliance. And this is the idea of bringing, multidisciplinary groups, bridging ideologies across geographies and sectors to really find those values alignments and to make sure that we're constantly infusing these conversations with a variety of voices. I mean, a lot of us have our groups that we work with pretty consistently. And so sometimes it's nice to open that up and expand beyond that and hear fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, fresh solutions. So I'd say that's another reason why it's important to work across the state. There's so many good reasons.
And I think another reason that as we talk and we have meetings of the Alliance, we're always aware of the fact that ideas take place in systems, and systems are I guess motivated and maneuvered and defined by the policies that are available to the actors. And so when you talk about setting policy that can affect big parts of Texas, essentially you're talking the state level, you're talking about state government policy that can get into every county in Texas and create, I guess the rules and regs as to how people do things. And so policy is a big part of what we are looking at, is a big part of the answer to creating scenarios that will help farmers and ranchers be better able to adapt some of these practices. And so again, policy takes place with the state government. So that's why we're focused on the state level.
Yes, and I would say that Judith would agree with that.
So coalition building is vital for a lot of reasons. One is our movement is way too small. And then if you just take pieces of that movement, it's, you're yelling into the storm without a megaphone. We need a coalition to amplify our voices. We need coalitions because we need to get as many viewpoints as possible to the table to integrate. I think I've spent a lot of time in coalitions, and I'm a farmer, and I feel pretty good about like really knowing a lot in this area. And still, when I'm at a meeting and we're bouncing ideas around as with different coalitions, most of the time I go, haven't thought of that one. There's just so much. There's so much to look at and think about in this world about this issue that you benefit the more people you can get to the table to talk these through, to think this through, to understand the complexities of each one of these pieces is vital. And in that process, hopefully also get more buy-in. So we talked earlier about the difficulty of making change and the human resistance to change. And one of the things that helps make change, make people open to change, is if they've been part of the process of developing that change and they have a community supporting them. So they don't feel like somehow they've just reversed themselves and now look at them, they're all out on their own walking off the edge of a cliff. And so when you build coalitions, you benefit the coalition as a whole by getting this diversity of opinions and views and knowledge and expertise. And then you also benefit on the output of this coalition of having more people that have bought into it, that are committed to it, that are prepared to say, okay, yeah, this is the time to start making these changes. Let's do it. I think it's going to be the only way we're going to get this done.
I agree. That's a beautiful summary. So then the last question that I have is really bringing it back to a lot of the work that you do, which is centering your work in the producer voice and what can really drive adaptation that will be adopted by the those who are most impacted by, as we've been talking about, the impacts of climate, for example. So how do you see producers contributing to the solution? I know it's vital to have them to be part of the solution. So how do you see their role in that?
I really think that even more, we just hit on the coalitions. We need a diversity of viewpoints and people bringing expertise. And I think that any coalition that does not center, not just have farmers at the table, but absolutely put farmers in the driving seat is missing the boat. And it's kind of ironic. I say this, I grew up a city girl. I grew up in the middle of North Dallas, the daughter of 2 university professors. Could not, no ag in the background. I don't know how many generations you have to go back to find agriculture in my family history. And, I have a lot of respect for the talents and the points of view that non-farmers bring. It's the world I grew up in. It's the world I was educated in. And there are awesome non-farmers out there working on this stuff. But, or maybe and if it doesn't work on the ground, it doesn't get us anywhere. And I've just been in so many contexts where I hear people put forward things that make a lot of sense on their face. Like these are not stupid people by any means. These are intelligent people who have good intentions and are coming up with things that on their face sound like great ideas. And then you have, sometimes I'm able to pierce their bubble if it's an area of farming I'm in. Or, sometimes I haven't. If it's not my area of farming, I may not understand the problem with it. And then I listen to another farmer be like, yeah, let me tear that apart for you and explain to you why that is really not going to help. And, we have to have that, because if we come up with these great sounding ideas that are theoretically awesome and they don't actually work for the farmers on the ground, then you're not getting anywhere down this road. I mean, you haven't gotten the car started to go down the road at that point. So we need to sit back, and I say this again, now I'm not, I know my area of farming, my little circle of it. I don't know all of it. And actually recently we had a discussion, there was a proposal brought to my organization, and actually it sounded pretty darn good to me. Actually, I was kind of like, this sounds like something maybe we want to throw in with. And then I asked for farmers who were working in that type of farming, and they just ripped it to shreds. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, yep, we're not doing it. Got it. And I would never have known that if I hadn't gone and tried centering the voices of the farmers, and specifically the farmers who know that area of farming, that type of farming. So the farmers don't have all the answers. I'm not making them out to be saints or geniuses. They don't have all the answers. And it benefits from the full range of all sorts of people being at the table. And there just has to be a bottom line respect and priority given to what the farmers at the table say.
We rejoin with Christine Martin, one of these producers centered in the resolution to these huge problems.
So I'm curious, Christine, you talked about, planning ahead and reducing your animal size compared to this year. Let's say August of this year compared to last year. Have you reduced any numbers of cattle or sheep or birds?
So actually, I've increased.
Wow.
Despite not having the rain, because of my management over the last three years, because I've only been on this property 3 years, I've actually been able to increase my animal units because I have allowed for the ecosystem to heal enough that that natural seed bed in the soil has started germinating. And so I have a little bit of everything on my pastures. I've got KR blue stem. I've got silverbeard blue stem. I've got Bermuda. Actually, I just found a clump of Eastern gamma grass, actually 2 big clumps of Eastern gamma grass that has suddenly come up because of my management practices. Eastern gamma grass is like the king of all prairie grasses, native prairie grasses. So I'm super stoked about that.
So Christine, in kind of response to Robert's question about, he asked you if you decreased your animals, but we find out that you actually increased your animals during this drought, of a drought that they're, calling maybe the worst since 1950. It's cool to hear that your management practices are building a resilience on your farm. And it's just amazing to hear that where other people are in dire straits and hurting, that you're still able to grow just from these climate smart agricultural practices that you're implementing on your place.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be able to say that I have increased my animal units, and hopefully others can hear this and make the correlation that how you manage your land will help you be more profitable, right? If you can carry a larger amount of animals on your land with just a minor change in your management practices, why would you not, right?
Exactly. And so kind of focusing in on that, how do you become a voice to get other producers on the same path of climate resiliency?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So right next door to me, I have a big, my neighbor owns thousands of acres, and he has a cow-calf operation, but on the land that he's got right next to me, that's where he holds his stockers. Every fall he comes in and he tills up the soil and seeds wheat, comes in and fertilizes the wheat, and then allows the stockers to graze that wheat through in the wintertime. And then he as the wheat dies off, the natural grasses come in. Most of it is coastal. And then at July, August, he takes his stockers off and takes them to the barn. I've had several of his cowboys, stop and say, how come you have all this grass? And so I tell him it's management. I let the grass recovery, but they continue doing what they've been doing. So, and it's a discussion that all of us that are in the holistic management mindset discuss quite often, is how do you get people to change? And a lot of times change only happens when there's a critical need. We're all hoping that this drought is that critical need that makes people think, maybe there's another way of doing this that might be better.
Yeah, definitely. And this whole idea around, using the producers' voices is something that the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance is really keying in on. And we look forward to utilizing your voice and many other mentor producers to get that message out there, because we are facing a big problem, and it's going to need a lot of people on the ground at the producer level to try and fix it.
Yeah, no, agreed.
So it sounds like we all agree that this big, gnarly problem needs to be addressed by a coalition of organizations and be centered in the producer voice.
And again, back to being centered in the producer voice, that makes such sense for NCAT and ATTRA. That's what we've done forever, particularly with ATTRA as a project of NCAT, focusing on agriculture, sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. The producers have always been the reason why we get up every day and do what we do. And so, they're the ones who have the most interest and the ability to change soil health indicators and to really work on soil health. And we're using, that as a way of trying to deal with climate problems that we're all experiencing. So not only are the farmers and ranchers, through their adoption of these new practices, going to help themselves and help their rural communities where they live, they're going to help us all of us urbanites, folks that live in the cities. We're going to have cleaner water, we're going to have cleaner air, we're going to have cleaner food. And so the producers are the ones who really have to move all of this. And us, NCAT, ATTRA, that's who we work for. And so it just, seemed obvious to me that we would be the kind of the instigators of this. Catalyst is another word, but I like to use often the word instigator. I'm not trying to say that we're the most important player on the team. We're not, but we are the instigators. And so we're always going to keep everybody's mind focused on the fact that the farmers and ranchers have got to be the center of all of this. Because if we don't have, successful farmers and ranchers, the whole system falls apart. And so we just all have to continually recognize that.
You're right, Robert. And putting producers in the driver's seat, as NCAT does, and really giving them the means and the platform to shape the design of programs that are intended to support soil health is an absolute must. They must inform the mechanism that's intended to support them. Otherwise, if it doesn't work on the ground, it's not going to get us anywhere.
Well, that poignantly illustrates the work that NCAT provides and how great an effect the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance will have across the Texas landscape. And who knows, maybe even across the U.S. I just want to thank everyone for speaking with me today and helping us get to know the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance.
Well, that concludes our two-part series on NCAT's work on the Texas Soil Wealth Alliance. Be sure to listen to the first part of the conversation. The link is in the show notes to this podcast. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.